From a tiny Roman settlement to the world's most romantic city. From brutal medieval streets to revolutionary bloodbaths. From Nazi occupation to global fashion capital. This is Paris, 2,000 years of triumph, tragedy, and transformation in just 14 minutes. Using cutting-edge AI technology, we're bringing the entire history of Paris back to life like never before. You think you know Paris? By the end of this video, you will discover the dark secrets behind the Eiffel Tower, witness the bloodiest day in French history, and see how a city that's been destroyed multiple times became the cultural heart of the world. History hides secrets they never taught you in school. Subscribe and uncover them with us. Our story begins in 52 BC, but Paris was not called Paris. It was Lutetia, a muddy island settlement that would witness one of history's most brutal conquests. The Parisii tribe lived on what we now call Ile de la Cite. Using AI reconstruction of archaeological evidence, we can see their wooden huts, fishing boats, and the strategic bridges that controlled river trade. But their peaceful existence was about to end forever. Julius Caesar's legions surrounded the island. What happened next would echo through 2,000 years of Parisian history, the first of many violent transformations. The Romans destroyed the Celtic settlement and rebuilt it as Lutetia. They constructed the first iteration of what would become Notre Dame, built thermal baths where the Cluny Museum stands today, and created the amphitheater that still exists in the Latin Quarter. This AI recreation shows Roman Paris at its peak, a prosperous provincial town of 10,000 people. But Rome's grip was weakening. Barbarian tribes were massing beyond the Rhine, and Paris was about to face its first apocalypse. 451 AD, Attila the Hun's army approached Paris. The city seemed doomed. But one woman's faith would create a legend that saved Paris and made her the city's patron saint. Saint Genevieve convinced the terrified Parisians not to flee. She organized prayers and fasting. Miraculously, Attila's army turned away at the last moment. Whether divine intervention or military strategy, Paris survived its first existential threat. The Franks conquered what remained of Roman Gaul, and Paris became the capital of a kingdom that would eventually become France. But medieval Paris was a nightmare of disease, violence, and squalor. Using AI to recreate medieval manuscripts and archaeological evidence, we can see 6th to 8th century Paris. Wooden buildings crowded together, creating perfect conditions for fires that regularly destroyed entire neighborhoods. The Seine was an open sewer. Disease was rampant. Yet Paris survived and slowly grew. 845 AD, Viking longships appeared on the Seine. For the first time since Attila, Paris faced total destruction. And this time there was no saint to save them. The Vikings did not just raid Paris, they besieged it for months. But the defense of Paris in 885 to 886 AD would create the legendary reputation that made Paris the heart of medieval Europe. Count Odo led the defense of Paris against 30,000 Vikings and 700 ships. For 11 months Paris held out. The siege became legendary across Europe. Paris emerged not just as a survivor, but as a symbol of Christian resistance against pagan invaders. By 1100, Paris had transformed into something unrecognizable. The muddy island had become the intellectual center of Europe, but also the most dangerous city in the known world. The University of Paris was founded, attracting scholars from across Europe. Students lived in terrible conditions, often resorting to crime to survive. The city expanded to both banks of the Seine. Notre Dame Cathedral began construction in 1163. This AI reconstruction shows the medieval building site with its revolutionary Gothic innovations. But medieval Paris was also the stage for one of history's most horrific massacres, an event that would haunt Jewish-Christian relations for centuries. In 1182, King Philip Augustus expelled all Jews from Paris, seizing their property and burning their books. It was the first major expulsion in Western Europe, setting a deadly precedent. Medieval Paris was a city of learning and bigotry, beauty and brutality. The 14th century brought the Black Death. 1/3 of Paris died in agony. But even worse was coming: foreign invasion and civil war that would nearly destroy France forever. 1420, English armies occupied Paris. French nobles fled. For the first time in 500 years, Paris was ruled by foreigners. It seemed like France itself might cease to exist. The 100 Years' War devastated Paris. English soldiers patrolled French streets. French culture was suppressed. But in the countryside, a peasant girl was receiving visions that would change everything. Joan of Arc never liberated Paris, she died trying. But her sacrifice inspired a French revival that would make Paris the most powerful city in Europe. The 16th century transformed Paris into a Renaissance masterpiece. But beneath the artistic flowering lay religious hatred that would explode into one of history's most shocking massacres. Francis I rebuilt Paris with Italian Renaissance architecture. The Louvre was transformed from a medieval fortress into a royal palace. This AI reconstruction shows Renaissance Paris at its height: elegant buildings, vibrant markets, and the bustling Seine. August 24, 1572, St. Bartholomew's Day. What started as a royal wedding became the most horrific religious massacre in French history. The Seine ran red with Protestant blood. Catholics murdered thousands of Protestants in their homes, on the streets, in churches. Bodies were thrown into the Seine. Children were killed alongside their parents. The massacre spread across France, claiming up to 30,000 lives. Renaissance Paris had shown its capacity for ultimate brutality. But from this religious bloodshed emerged a king who would give Paris its most iconic features, and create the template for absolute monarchy that would rule Europe for centuries. Henri IV survived the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre, converted to Catholicism, Paris is worth a mass, and became the most beloved king in French history. He created the Place de Vosges, the first planned urban square in Paris. He built the Pont Neuf, Paris's oldest surviving bridge. Louis XIV turned Paris into the most magnificent city on earth. But his obsession with grandeur would plant the seeds of revolution that would destroy his dynasty forever. The Sun King expanded the Louvre, created the Champs-Élysées, and built Versailles. But he also imposed crushing taxes on ordinary Parisians to fund his wars and palaces. This AI reconstruction shows 17th-century Paris, elegant aristocratic neighborhoods contrasting sharply with overcrowded slums. While nobles danced at Versailles, ordinary Parisians lived in conditions worse than medieval times. The contrast was so extreme it would eventually explode into the most violent revolution in European history. Paris in the late 17th and 18th centuries was a city of extremes. The wealthy lived in new elegant hotels particuliers with running water and sewage systems. The poor crowded into tenements 6 to 7 stories high, with entire families sharing single rooms. Raw sewage ran through the streets. The Enlightenment made Paris the intellectual capital of the world. Voltaire, Rousseau, and Diderot questioned everything, including the right of kings to rule. Their ideas would soon be tested with revolutionary violence. Paris salons became centers of intellectual debate. Coffee houses spread radical ideas. The encyclopedia was compiled in Paris, spreading knowledge across Europe. But intellectual freedom and social inequality created an explosive combination. July 14, 1789, the storming of the Bastille. It began as a search for gunpowder and became the symbol of revolution worldwide. But what came next was far more violent than anyone imagined. The Bastille fortress had only 7 prisoners, but its fall symbolized the end of the old regime. This AI reconstruction shows the moment revolutionaries broke down the gates, freed the prisoners, and paraded the governor's severed head through Paris streets. The revolution devoured its own children. Robespierre, who led the terror, was eventually executed by the same guillotine he used to kill thousands. The Place de la Révolution ran with so much blood that residents complained about the smell. Between 1793 to 1794, over 2,600 people were guillotined in Paris during the Reign of Terror. Former friends denounced each other. Entire families were executed. The revolutionary government became more tyrannical than the kings they replaced. From the chaos emerged Europe's greatest military genius. Napoleon would make Paris the capital of an empire stretching from Spain to Russia. But his ambitions would ultimately lead to foreign armies occupying Paris twice in 15 years. Napoleon transformed Paris with the Arc de Triomphe, improved sewers and standardized building heights. But his wars cost millions of lives and bankrupted France. In 1814 and 1815, Russian, Prussian, and British armies occupied Paris, the first foreign occupation since the 100 Years' War. The Paris you know today did not exist before 1850. Baron Haussmann demolished medieval Paris and rebuilt it completely. But this urban revolution came at a terrible human cost. Napoleon III and Baron Haussmann tore down 60% of medieval Paris. They created the grand boulevards, uniform building heights, and sewage systems that define modern Paris. But 350,000 poor residents were forced from their homes with no compensation. The transformation was also a military strategy. The wide boulevards prevented revolutionary barricades and allowed rapid troop movement. Haussmann was designing a city to prevent revolution, but revolution came anyway. 1870, Prussia besieged Paris for 4 months. Parisians ate rats, cats, and zoo animals to survive. When the siege ended, civil war erupted. The Paris Commune of 1871 saw the French fighting French in the streets. Government troops executed 20,000 communards. From the Civil War emerged the Belle Époque, the most glamorous era in Paris history. Art, literature, and culture flourished like never before. But World War I would end this golden age in the most devastating way possible. The Eiffel Tower was built for the 1889 World's Fair. Impressionist painters like Monet and Renoir revolutionized art. The Moulin Rouge opened. Paris became synonymous with culture, fashion, and joie de vivre. World War I never reached Paris, but it killed an entire generation of young Frenchmen. The city survived, but French confidence was shattered forever. And worse was coming. 1.4 million French soldiers died in World War I. Paris escaped physical destruction but lost its optimism. The 1920s brought American expatriates like Hemingway and Fitzgerald, but economic depression and political instability followed. June 14, 1940, German tanks rolled down the Champs-Élysées. For the first time in 600 years, Paris was occupied by a hostile foreign army. What happened next would shame France for generations. Nazi occupation lasted 4 years. Many Parisians collaborated, informing on Jewish neighbors and resistance fighters. 75,000 French Jews were deported to death camps. The City of Light became a city of darkness. August 25, 1944, Liberation. General de Gaulle walked down the Champs-Élysées as German snipers fired from buildings. Paris was free, but the scars of occupation would never fully heal. The liberation of Paris became a symbol of hope worldwide. But post-war France faced decolonization, economic challenges, and social revolution. The old world was dying, a new France was being born. May 1968, student riots erupted in the Latin Quarter. For a month, Paris was in revolutionary chaos again. This time, the revolution was about culture, freedom, and changing the entire Western world. Students built barricades, fought police, and occupied universities. Workers went on strike. President de Gaulle fled Paris. For a few weeks, it seemed like another French Revolution was beginning. The movement failed politically but changed Western culture forever. Modern Paris became a city of grand projects. Beaubourg, the Louvre Pyramid, La Défense. President Mitterrand wanted to create monuments rivaling the Sun King. But Paris also became a city of social division. The 1970s, 80s brought massive urban renewal. Modern skyscrapers rose in La Défense. The Pompidou Center revolutionized museum design. But immigration, unemployment, and rising inequality created new social tensions in the banlieues. 2005, the banlieues exploded. 3 weeks of rioting revealed the deep divisions in modern France. Paradise for tourists, but exclusion and rage for millions of residents. January 2015, terrorist attacks at Charlie Hebdo. November 2015, 130 killed at the Bataclan and cafes. Paris faced a new kind of war, urban terrorism that threatened the open, tolerant society Paris represents. The terrorist attacks shocked the world. Je suis Charlie, and Je suis Paris became global rallying cries for free expression. Paris showed its resilience once again, but the threats to democratic societies had evolved. April 15, 2019, Notre Dame burned. The world watched in horror as 850 years of history went up in flames. But within hours, billions of euros were pledged for reconstruction. Paris endures. Today, Paris remains one of the world's most visited cities. 30 million tourists annually come to see the monuments built by kings, emperors, and presidents. The city that began as a muddy Celtic settlement has survived Vikings, English occupation, revolutions, civil wars, world wars, and terrorist attacks. From Celtic fishing village to global cultural capital. 2,000 years of triumph and tragedy. Paris has been destroyed and reborn multiple times, but the City of Light always survives. Which moment in Paris history shocked you most? The St. Bartholomew's Day massacre? The terror? Nazi occupation? Let me know in the comments below. If you want to see more cities brought to life with AI reconstruction, smash that subscribe button and hit the notification bell. Next week, the entire history of London in 40 minutes, and trust me, it's even more violent than Paris.